But look at what the end of verse 9 says. I love this. Let your saints shout for joy. Now the context is spending time with God, getting alone with God, coming up to His tabernacle, being like a priest. But this is the ultimate expression. What he was saying here is, I want to engage in the corporate worship. Look at what it says. It's plural. Let your saints shout for joy. Not that saint, or not just this saint. But what he's talking about is when everyone came up to assemble at the tabernacle for these sacred festivals, the 3 times the whole nation was to assemble, he says, I want to engage in that corporate worship. Now think about that for a moment, because we're gathered for corporate worship to the Lord right now. Did you shout for joy about that? Or were you a little troubled that maybe they didn't sing your favorite song this morning? Or maybe part of it was too loud, or part of it wasn't loud enough? You know what I mean? We get into all this critical analysis, and we miss the engaging to offer corporate worship. Here's what David was thinking. It's a plural, saints. And he was personally a seeker of the Lord that made him come into the congregation of the saints with so much zeal. What does the end of verse 9 say he wanted to do? He wanted to shout. In fact, look at verse 16. He says it again. At the end of verse 16, and her saints shall shout aloud for joy. He wanted to experience and participate in corporate worship. Think about that with me this morning. He had such a zeal, he wanted to shout to the Lord. Did your heart shout this morning? Maybe you weren't yelling, you didn't cup your hands to your mouth. Whoop, and I covered my mic. Cup your hands to your mouth like that and shout. This thing's powerful enough. If I shouted and he didn't cut it off quick enough, it'd probably hurt. We're not talking about that. We're talking about engaging in corporate worship. Does your face radiate a deep love for the Lord? Or does it just look distracted, disinterested, detached? Is your mind on what you're going to do this afternoon? Is it already at work tomorrow? Is it already on your schoolwork you haven't finished, or on whatever your amusement is going to be this afternoon? Or is your heart shouting? Is your countenance, the Lord is the strength of our countenance. Does your face radiate adoration and love for the Lord? It can if you want it to. See, we all get what we really want. And what did David really want? He didn't want to be indifferent. He wanted to join his heart in worship to the Lord God Almighty. And so he engaged in corporate worship. And that's what this psalm is all about. His spiritual secret was, verses 3, 4, and 5, he put God ahead of comfort, made a holy habit to make time with God. Have you ever done that? Number 1. Number 2, starting in verse 6, as a shepherd boy, he longed for God. He sought purity in verse 9. He engaged in worship at the end of verse 9. Have you ever come to that point in your life? This is David looking back on what the secrets were of his life as a young man. Now turn back to Psalm 101, because I want to show you one other psalm from this early time in his life. 101st Psalm. David actually made some vows for his personal conduct and consecration. If you know anything about American history, one of the mightiest minds of American culture that's ever been produced was Jonathan Edwards. His writings are so profound that he's considered, even by secular people, as having one of the most powerful minds of an American thinker. And what he recorded. But if you look at his spiritual side, he had some of the most profound resolves. Jonathan Edwards, lived by resolves. And one of his resolved, he wasn't going to do anything today that he wouldn't want to do if it was the last moment of his life. Boy, that's a great resolve. He lived that way. He said, I'll never do anything I wouldn't want to be caught doing if I died by anyone, so that God would be displeased. Well, look at David. David wrote his resolves down in a very profound way in the 101st Psalm. I call this his pathway to a godly life. And it's a collection of choices or resolves of holiness to God. And you notice he says 7 times in this little psalm, I will do something. You can see it. Verse 1, I will sing of mercy and justice to you, O Lord. I will sing praises. Verse 2, I will Verse 3, I will. Verse 4, I will. Verse 5, I will. Verse 8, I will. Do you see them all the way through? All these I wills. All the way through this psalm. And some of them are duplicates, but you find that this is a collection of resolves, holy resolves. And he fled to the Lord as his refuge from sin in his youth. It could have been that this psalm was written when he was a young person, or it's one of these looking back, because in this time of becoming king, David wrote a lot of psalms about starting his career. And so I don't fight for it being specifically written when he was a teenager or written when he was ascending to the throne and coming on as the king. But it doesn't matter. He's talking about his youth. And let me take you through the 101st Psalm real quickly, and that's probably all we'll have time for this morning. At least we covered 2 Psalms in one morning.